Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. Thank you so very much for joining me wherever you are in the world, whether it's day or night, whatever it is that you're doing. You are so welcome to the channel, and I send my love to each and every one of you and all the best for the season. Season's greetings to everybody. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell. Believe it or not, in this story it does appear that a woman who was slightly overweight, because of her being overweight, she actually got to meet Bigfoot. So let's get started with today's encounter. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Kathy and I'm from Arlington Ridge in West Virginia, and my Bigfoot encounter happened to me and also to my mother Paula in 2016. At the time I was about 18 years old and my mother was 42. I was born and raised in the historic neighbourhood of Arlington Ridge, which is quite literally minutes away from the dining and nightlife of Washington, D.C. My family reside in a very quiet, slow-paced, rather serene, leafy green suburb, where we live in a very attractive, colonial, rectangular-shaped red-bricked home that is set quite a way back from the street itself, with large symmetrical windows and a central wooden white front door. Our home has a very pretty terraced manicured garden full of colourful blooms in the front yard, and our backyard has a kidney-shaped swimming pool and a sumptuous entertainment area which is surrounded by a large rolling green lawn and a scattering of fruit trees. My father works in the Arlington area for a well-established automobile company, and my mother works mornings 3 times a week showing around potential buyers the exhibits for a local art gallery. My rather strange and peculiar story begins when my family had been invited to an outdoor prestigious wedding venue in an exquisite rural retreat that was surrounded by dreamy forests, rolling green West Virginian countryside, silvery lakes, ponds and statuesque mountains. It was an idyllic part of the world. My cousin Jennifer was actually getting married and had requested my mother to be a maid of honour at the event and for me to be one of the 7 bridesmaids. As you can imagine, as is invariably the case with every bride, Cousin Jennifer wanted absolutely nothing to go wrong for her special day. She had told me that on a recent trip to Singapore, she had discovered the perfect lilac satin that she wanted to use for her bridesmaids and maids of honour outfits, and so subsequently she phoned everyone, asking them for their dress measurements and sizes about 6 months prior to the wedding day, as Jennifer was an exceptionally organised and efficient person. Fast forward to about 6 weeks before the wedding day, and the postman delivered a large box for us from Jennifer. It contained my mother's outfit, which was a skirt and a tunic-style top, and mine, which was a bridesmaid's dress. "These are the outfits for Jennifer's wedding," I cried out in delight as I opened the door, holding the big box in my hand. "It's arrived!" gasped my mother in delight. "I'm dying to see what the outfit looks like." My father shook his head with amusement as he sat on the settee, watching my mother and I behaving like 2 excited kids, unwrapping their Christmas presents. We both dived into our individual wrapped boxes and untied the large lilac ribbons as hastily as we could. We both knew that if these outfits were indeed designed by Jennifer, that they were going to be incredibly stylish, classic and smart, because Jennifer had phenomenal taste. I opened the tissue paper and removed the delicate, very snazzy dress from the folds of paper, and I gasped in awe at the extravagant lilac material with the exquisite gold embroidery. It was such a sophisticated style of dress that I knew that I could enjoy it for many other occasions in the future, because it was such a classic design and did not look like a quintessential bridesmaid's dress, but more like a work of art. "Oh, Mum," I sighed. "Look how gorgeous my dress is," I said, holding it up against my body. "I can't wait to try it on." My mother unfolded her incredibly snazzy skirt and tunic from the tissue paper. She excitedly removed her bridal outfit that looked incredibly stunning with its beautiful gold embroidery on the collar and, of course, on the bottom of the skirt as well. My mother let out a huge gasp. "It's stunning," she said. "So sophisticated and elegant," she cried out in delight. My mother and I began to try on our outfits very eagerly, and while my mother could put the skirt on, she could not pull the zipper up because she had put on way too much weight since she was measured 6 months prior. She looked absolutely mortified. "What am I going to do?" she wailed. I can't fit into this little pokey thing. Why on earth did Jennifer make this wretched thing so tight? I feel like a hippopotamus bursting at the seams. I realised in horror that I was also unable to pull the zipper up all the way on my dress, because it appeared that I had also surreptitiously piled on the pounds, unbeknown to me. How on earth had this happened? It was as if the universe was telling me what I already knew. I did not want to confront something I'd been willfully denying for far too long, and now the truth was hitting me so hard, like a violent blow to the face. Kathy, you're just too fat. I stared in horror in the mirror at the unwanted bulges that had sneakily crept up around my middle in the dead of night when I wasn't looking. It just wasn't fair. My mother was looking at herself in the mirror with an expression of disgusted revulsion on her face, and was in far worse shape than me, as the bulges of extra adipose tissue were not cooperating with her outfit that she so badly wanted to wear. And unfortunately the tunic top did not conceal the open zipper, so everything was hanging out, and it was far from pretty. "What's wrong?" asked my tall, slender father, entering the room. "Why such disheartened expressions on your faces?" he inquired. "A moment ago you were ecstatic as you were opening your brand new outfits, but now you both look as if you're about to attend a funeral. I thought you were both excited about your cousin's wedding." "I would be," said my mother, "if I could get this pathetic zipper up on this skirt. How can I go to the wedding looking like this? I can't understand how I've put on so much weight in such a short period of time. It's horrifying." My father began to crack up laughing as he saw us struggling with our zippers. "My two beluga whales," he chuckled. "I love you, both rolls and all." "That's not funny, Peter," my mother chastised him. "It's all right for you being able to eat everything you want without picking up a gram of weight. Look at me," she said, stroking her extended stomach. "I have the most terrible, terrible metabolism, and I look like I'm expecting triplets, never mind twins." "I'm not sure that's true, sweetheart," laughed my father. "You eat twice as much as I do, and lately you've been going through tubs of your favourite chocolate chip ice cream, as if there was no tomorrow. What about all that pizza you always consume? Not to mention those Chinese takeouts." "What are you saying, Peter?" said my mother, looking at him with a furious expression on her face. "Are you telling me that I'm a pig?" "No, of course not, darling," chuckled my father. "But maybe if you cut back a little bit on the ice cream for a start, you might just lose a little more weight." My mother looked at my father with an expression of unadulterated horror. "If you open your mouth and say another word, I will kill you," she said to my dad. "Mum," I said, "this is very serious. We can't go to the wedding with our zips like this. Can you imagine how humiliating that would be? We'll be the butt of everybody's jokes at the wedding, and Jennifer will be absolutely gutted if our wedding outfits ruin her photographs." My mother examined the clothes very closely, but she realised that the outfits could not be extended in any way, and we could not get them remade by a great dressmaker because the fabric wasn't available in this country, nor could we get such meticulous embroidery done at such short notice. It really was a bummer, and we only had 6 weeks to rectify the damage that already had been done. "We've got 6 weeks left," said my mother. "We're going to have to starve ourselves to death before the wedding day. The last thing I feel like doing is being a rabbit for 6 long weeks, but I guess I've got no choice in the matter. I have to force myself to lose this weight." She proceeded to go into the kitchen to ruthlessly throw out all the tempting treats in our cupboards into a large bin bag. "Why are you throwing them away?" I asked my mother. "Isn't it such a waste?" "Kathy," said my mother, in a very determined voice, "we cannot have any temptation in our midst. We have to eliminate it all from our lives, lest we should be tempted. This is the first thing they do on those diet programs on television, and that is to get rid of the calorific treats. We have no choice in the matter if we want to be successful." For the next couple of days, my mother and I were utterly miserable as we sat at the table with our tiny plates carpeted with broccoli and a touch of steamed chicken breasts, while we watched my dad enviously scoffing a plate of delicious macaroni cheese in front of us, as if it was no big deal. It got worse. He proceeded to go to the freezer and help himself to a large helping of salted caramel ice cream, which he topped with mini marshmallows and chocolate sauce. "Right, I've had just about enough," said my mother, eyeing my dad's meal like a salivating dog that couldn't take it a moment longer. She picked up her cell phone to call our Chinese takeaway place. "I can't sit back watching your dad eating melt-in-the-mouth mac and cheese, and I'm eating war-sized rations of the most putrid green muck," she explained. "Yes, I'd like some sweet and sour chicken. Yes, spring rolls, rice, that's right," she said. "That's right." "Mum," I said in horror, "what about your diet? You're never going to fit into your outfit if you keep scoffing Chinese takeouts. There's not much time left for the wedding. You need to lose the weight fast." "Look, darling," said my mother, "I'm starving hungry right now," she said. "If I don't eat something more substantial, I'm going to fade away, and then I won't be able to attend your cousin's wedding anyway. I'll start the diet tomorrow, I promise." I'm afraid to admit that my worst fears were finally confirmed. As every day went by, my mother started her day with very good intentions in regards to her diet, and appeared motivated and very disciplined. But by dinner time she was so starved that she'd sneakily order pizzas and Chinese takeouts when nobody was looking. I would actually observe her creeping out of the house at all hours of the night, and she would surreptitiously drive somewhere, and when she returned home she seemed a lot more chirpy and upbeat. I was to discover all the kinds of wrappers, from chocolate bars, empty ice cream containers, pizza boxes and Chinese takeouts that she had brought and eaten in the car, while hiding the startling evidence under her front seat. She had not fooled me, but every time I confronted her with my findings in regards to her secret scoffing sessions, she would assure me that the diet would definitely begin tomorrow. But invariably tomorrow never ever came, as is often the case with most diets. I'm very glad to inform you that I did manage to stick to my broccoli and chicken diet and overcome all the temptations that came my way, so the weight did fall off me very fast. But in my mother's case, she gained even more weight during the 6-week period. The day before the wedding, my mother was faced with the grim reality that the zipper of her skirt was not going to slide up, and worse still, the skirt had become even tighter. "This horrible, horrible skirt," my mother protested. "It's so tight around my thighs, I can barely walk. I feel like a sausage dog stuffed in a tight sock. This isn't funny. I think I'm going to burst out of the skirt on the dance floor in the wedding. What on earth am I going to do?" My father chuckled with amusement when he saw my mother pulling her stomach in as hard as she could to prise up the stubborn zipper, but to no avail, as the zipper just refused to budge. "It's too tight on you, darling," said my dad. "You look ridiculous, like a sausage bursting out of its skin. You can't possibly wear that. I think you should buy a dress of a similar colour for the wedding. I'm sure Jennifer will understand." "I cannot do that, Peter," snapped my mother. "I can't let Jennifer down. She's gone to all this trouble getting this dress made for me. I'll buy a long lilac cardigan to cover the back of the skirt, to conceal the open zipper." "Are you sure that will work?" asked my dad. "It'll just have to," sighed my mother. "But Mum," I protested, "what if it's too hot for you to wear a cardigan?" "Well, I'll just have to bite the bullet and deal with it," said my mother. Fast forward to the wedding day, and it really was a beautiful, charming outdoor event, and things couldn't have gone better for Jennifer. It was a sweltering hot day, and my mother really suffered with the steamy conditions in her lilac cardigan, and I also noticed she was struggling to walk because her skirt was so tight around her thighs she could barely make a step. "I can hardly breathe," she whispered to me during the ceremony. "This skirt is sucking the life out of me, and I'm sweating like a pig. I feel like I'm going to pass out and faint," she said, patting the beads of perspiration off her forehead with a tissue. Before long, we'd eaten a delectable 5-course meal and listened to the long, drawn-out, rather boring wedding speeches, until finally the guests were invited to dance on a portable black and white dance floor set up on the grass while the DJ played the music. "Come and dance," said my dad, whisking my mother off her feet onto the dance floor. I sat at the table watching my parents arm in arm dancing together, and I was just thinking what an incredibly lovely couple they made when I suddenly realised, to my alarm, that my mother's skirt had ripped open on the dance floor and was sliding down her legs, revealing her large pair of white knickers. I'm sure I actually heard someone snigger and laugh, and I raced up to the dance floor to rescue my mother from this brutal humiliation. Oh no, I thought. Please God, no. I raced up to my mother and whispered, "Follow me now and hold your skirt up. It's falling off you. Everybody can see your undies." My mother tottered after me, holding up her skirt in her hands, as some guest looked curiously in our direction, as if to say, "What on earth is going on there?" My mother and I quickly made our way to a densely wooded area, far from the wedding crowd. "What are we going to do?" said my mother, stepping out of her skirt and holding it into the air to examine it. "Oh, I've gone and ripped the entire thing to shreds," she said. "What are we going to do now?" "We're going to leave," I told her. "I'll phone Dad on my cell phone and tell him to meet us at the back road in his car. If we go through the wooded area, the back road is on the other side. I'll get Dad to tell Jennifer that we took you home because you had a dicky tummy." "Very well," said my mother. "I suppose we don't have any other options. I can hardly return to the venue wearing a short top and a pair of knickers, can I?" I arranged for my dad to meet us at the back road and told him that we were walking through the forest to avoid being seen or observed by any of the wedding guests. "It's such a relief being in here," said my mother. "It's so lovely and cool and refreshing, and I feel free now that I've got that ghastly tightly skirt off. This must be how a snake feels once it's eliminated its old skin." The forest was exquisitely beautiful, and I know of no words to describe it other than to say it quite literally took my breath away. I could see that this dreamy forest was superbly maintained, with clear hiking trails, and although I'd been here before, it was much more exquisite than I last remembered it. I noticed that the moss-covered trees were easily over 300 years old, with the most gigantic-sized trunks I've ever observed. They towered into the blue sky like statuesque green giants, and their outstretched branches created an amazing canopy above our heads that allowed just enough sunlight to dapple the forest floor in pretty prisms of soft light. Even the ground was covered in delicate green creeping foliage and ground covers such as ferns and ivies, and it was just so incredibly pretty. The bird calls in the forest, from the whistles to the warbles and tweets, were equally as charming, and it felt so good to be close to nature. I took off my heels and walked bare feet across the path, enjoying the feeling of the freedom that my feet felt escaping the confines of my tight, uncomfortable shoes. A couple of adorable squirrels eyed us curiously with bright, beady brown eyes as they darted from one tree to another like a mischievous pair of furry gymnasts, and it would seem that my mother and I startled several very gentle-looking white-tailed deers that looked at us in alarm and scuttled away in a fervent hurry. Suddenly we heard a whistling sound, and that was when I instructed my mother to hide, because I could tell that someone was definitely coming, and I didn't want them to see my mother in her humiliating state of undress. "Quick, hide," I said, pushing my mother behind the girth of a very large oak tree. As the person moved towards us, his footsteps sounded very heavy, almost like that of a huge, hefty animal. The whistling continued, and that was when my mother and I laid our eyes on the mythical creature called Bigfoot. I literally could not believe what I was viewing, because until this very second in time, I'd always believed Bigfoot to be a creature of fantasy or fiction. Now we were seeing him, larger than life, literally standing yards away from us. I could barely believe it. I've heard them describe Bigfoot in documentaries before as big, but this creature went beyond big. It was colossal, so much so that it was well in line with a hippo or a rhino. He had those kind of burly, bulky, powerful, strong proportions, but in a humanoid shape or form. Every part of this creature's body was gargantuan, yet at the same time streamlined and built for power, speed, agility and grace. I could tell that this imposing, impressive beast possessed very evident human-like characteristics, but also exhibited a profound resemblance to the great ape in many ways. In particular, its overlong arms, which I imagined enabled the creature to swing on the branches, much like a orangutan, or run on all fours like a monkey. I imagine that even its Goliath proportions and extensive girth would not impair its ability to climb and swing on trees, because I think the Bigfoots are so agile, I'm pretty certain they can balance out their weight with effortless ease so that they don't break the tree branches beneath them. I could, of course, be very wrong. The Bigfoot appeared to be covered with human-like hair, and definitely not fur. I actually have a friend with long strawberry blonde hair, and his hair was very similar to hers, only of course much more tangled and matted, but it was very beautiful in colour and texture like hers is. I also observed that this Bigfoot had the hugest, very defined muscular shoulders that I've actually ever seen, and it had a distinctive bullet-shaped head and an angular face with a very furrowed, wrinkled forehead, a grey leathery skin, and very deep-set golden brown eyes. The Bigfoot continued to whistle happily to himself, and then to my absolute amazement and surprise, he actually picked up my mother's shredded skirt that was lying on the footpath. He picked it up and smelt it, and studied the fabric in his hands, and seemed to appreciate its beauty and soft sheen, as he rubbed his sausage-like fingers across the fabric, and made an enthused grunting sound. He kept smelling the skirt intently, and I could tell that he approved of the female pheromones that he could detect. I'm almost certain from that the creature was male, and enjoyed smelling my mother's female scent. He rolled up the fabric under his arms, looking quite jubilant with his finding, and then glided down the forest path, whistling very happily to himself. I'm only grateful that he didn't observe us, as I do not know how he would have reacted if he had. In truth, I think I would have freaked out if he'd seen me, because the creature was just so powerful, strong, and exceedingly intimidating. "Oh, my goodness," whispered my mother so excitedly, with eyes as wide as saucers. "We've just seen Bigfoot! Do you realise what a monumental deal that is? And we saw him really close up! I can hardly believe it." I was unable to say a thing, as I trembled in shock. I felt a combination of awe and sheer terror from what we'd just observed. "Did you see how big he was?" asked my mother. "I feel skinny next to that creature," she giggled. "He was gargantuan and very tall. He must have easily been over 1,000 pounds, 9 foot tall, and at a rough estimate about 4 foot wide. He was so beautiful, Mum, don't you think?" "Oh, there's no doubt about that," my mother reflected. "He was magnificent and inspirational, in much the same way as any impressive apex predator like a lion or tiger. Oh, yes, he possessed a very powerful, majestic presence. Of that there is no doubt." Finally we made our way through the forest, where my dad was waiting impatiently for us at the car. "What took you so long?" he asked. "I've been waiting here for quite some time." "We got a little waylaid," I explained, not wishing to talk about our strange encounter, as I was naturally processing everything that I'd observed in my mind and trying to make sense of it all. "I did what you said," said my father. "I told Jennifer that your mum had a dicky tummy and needed to come home, and she understood. She said she did think your mother looked a little peaky and off-colour, wearing a cardigan in the scorching heat." Fast forward a few weeks, and my mother and I did finally tell our dad about our Bigfoot encounter once we'd processed it all ourselves. Even though he believed our extraordinary account, he urged us not to tell anyone about our experience for fear of ridicule and disbelief. In a strange way, I'm rather grateful that my mother humiliated herself by bursting out of her wedding outfit. Otherwise, we'd never have made that hasty escape through those woods, nor would we have encountered the hairy critter known as Bigfoot. When Jennifer asked me what I actually thought of her wedding, I told her it was the best day of my entire life. She was thrilled when I told her that. It was not, of course, due to the lavish affair, on which no expense had been spared, but rather because of the chance encounter that we had with the hairy man, otherwise known as Bigfoot, that did not cost a penny at all, other than a shredded-up skirt and a little bit of embarrassment. My mother is still battling the bulge and the challenge of overcoming the temptations of Chinese takeout, but she's always quick to point out that Bigfoot makes her feel very skinny, and she's even placed a Bigfoot picture on the fridge to remind her of that fact. So there you are. That's my story. Well, I just want to say thank you so much for such a wonderful story. I loved it. And it is incredible to think that a split skirt actually enabled you to have a split-second encounter with Bigfoot.